Friday 13th? Woo! And the sun's out too, right? What's up with that? Okay. For today only. So let me introduce myself. My name is Malaku Dubi. I often go by Mel. I'm here on behalf of ITS Washington. We were asked to host a session here, and this kind of came out at one of our happy hours with some of our cabinet members. And so challenges with technology and deployment was often a topic that's discussed within us, and we're like, let's kind of make it formal. Let's have an open discussion about this with people that work in the industry and can just kind of work through it. So a little bit about myself. Like I said, my name is Mel. I work at HNTV. It's an engineering consulting firm in pretty much all over the country, but we're based out of Bellevue, Washington. And so I'm an ITS and traffic engineer. I went to school here. I did my master's degree here in 2016. And so I've been so I'm a cool though, so undergraduate. I'm a little conflicted, but you know, I'm used to conflict. So so I worked in the industry about 10 years. I started off at a private consulting firm at Parametrics, did engineering, road design, trails, things like that, and then I got into traffic operations in the city of Seattle. I worked there for about 7 years. So yeah, I've been at HNB for about a year and a few months now. So that's kind of a little bit about myself. Yeah, and then this topic of technology deployment is something that I've always been kind of in the thick of things and trying to define, how do we fit. In my previous role at City of Seattle, I was often working through, the rapid integration of technology in the private side, and then how does the public side fit into that. And so this often came up and was often discussed in our ITS Washington happy hours. And so things about, I did a Google of technology integration, and some of the challenging topics that came up were security, privacy, digital transformation, accelerated innovation, compliance, training, education, and of course AI. And so these are kind of things that we'll probably work through and talk about as we get through here. But yeah, that's kind of a little context and background about the topic. Kind of introduce our panelists here. I should probably sit down.
That's good. Whatever.
I don't want to set the tone and everybody stands up. But so starting with Andrew, let me get my notes here. So Andrew is a leader in transportation policy and initiatives. He's been working in the region. Has 15 years of experience. He's previously director also at the City of Seattle of Transit and Mobility, and has worked with redefining urban mobility by integrating mobile programs and services in the broader transportation system. Now he's Open Mobility's executive director, and he leads a unique public-private partnership where cities and companies collaborate in real time to co-create open source data standards, software tools cities need to digitize the infrastructure and manage all forms of mobility on the streets, which leading to more equitable and sustainable urban communities. That's Andrew. To his left is Kelly Rula. Kelly Rula works at the city, or sorry, not the city, you don't work at the city. She used to work at the City of Seattle as well, but she works at the
Urban Freight Lab.
Urban Freight Lab here at the University of Washington. And before coming to the Urban Freight Lab, she worked on the new mobility team at the City of Seattle Department of Transportation. She oversaw the mobility programs, led policy, strategic direction for new services like autonomous vehicles and urban freight, and advise on data and new technology innovations to help prepare the future transportation of Seattle. She also previously worked at Amazon and pretty much early on in the Prime Now deployment, and so she has a lot of experience there. She was a researcher at University of Texas Southern, and then she's now as the Urban Freight Lab director for policy and partnerships. Kelly leads innovative funding strategies for new partnerships and contributes a policy lens to current and future research projects. And then Steve Boyd. Steve Boyd is he works at Montage.
Montage.
It's a Dutch mobility services company. They're new to the country and to the area, and so he has background Steve is bringing that. He has scar tissue from focus on bringing the disruptive technology to market, and experience taught him that a whole product is required for success. One that includes delivering a total solution, integrating with ecosystem partners, solving a problem, and backed by support. At Monarch, Steve is bringing that approach to digital infrastructure and connected mobility. Prior working experience in mobility includes Verizon Transportation Systems and INRIX, as well as tech experience in RFID, semiconductors, cloud computing, mobile computing. Steve holds a BSME from University of Colorado and an MBA from Northern University Kellogg School. And then to my right is Anne. Anne leads the research team at King County Metro. She joined Metro 2022 after a long consulting career focused on applied research, evaluation, strategic planning, and a range of organizations in the government, private, philanthropic sectors. Many of these organizations focus on system and policy change to advance broad social environmental impact. King County's research team develops data and data products and supports evaluation of agency programs and initiatives to support innovation. Learning and adaptation and understanding of how programs and initiatives deliver on Metro's key promises of safe, equitable, and sustainable mobility. The King County Metro research team also supports teams and leaders to interpret and apply data to inform a range of decisions and actions. So that's our panelists here, and we try to capture like a lot of different perspectives in the industry. So yeah, I want to open it up. We wanted to change how we come to conferences and have conversations around this, and we didn't want to go and do a slide and have that old-fashioned kind of thing. We want to just kind of keep it conversational, and keep it open and freestyling the media here. So I want to open it up on after the introductions of everyone and what they do. Just kind of ask like, how do you guys interface? How do you interface with technology in your roles? We'll start off with Andrew here.
Awesome. All right, thanks, Mel. So like Mel said, Andrew Glass-Hastings, the Executive Director of the Open Mobility Foundation. The OMF, as it's known, is an international nonprofit public-private partnership focused on bringing cities together with technology companies and mobility providers to co-create open source data standards and tools that cities and public agencies use to manage shared mobility, manage the public right-of-way. So we're kind of right at the center of bringing cities together with their technology partners to create the digital infrastructure that they need to really ride this wave of digital transformation that we're seeing. And the OMF's work as an open source organization is bringing the public and private parties together in kind of a public working group model to create and then to kind of evolve two data standards. So one is the Mobility Data Specification, or MDS. And how you know or how you would have interacted with MDS is if you've ever used a shared scooter or bike here in Seattle or really any city on the planet. Because about 95% of all cities are using the Mobility Data Specification to manage those shared mobility systems, those micro-mobility systems. And not the actual system itself, but the exchange of data. And so MDS is a two-way common language that cities and operators use to share information. Cities receive data in a standardized format around the locations and status of the vehicles, the trip patterns, so that cities can use that information for system management, for planning, for compliance purposes. Because pretty much every city also has a permit or licensing structure that regulates those micromobility programs in their city. But perhaps more importantly, MDS is that common standard language that cities use to communicate digital policy back to those operators. Things like speed limits. Here in Seattle, when you ride a scooter for the first time, it goes really slow. That is a condition imposed by the permit requirements of the city, but actually communicated via the mobility data specification standard. So speed limits, geofenced areas, permanent geofences or temporary geofences around special events, and things like designated parking areas. So that's an example of how cities are pushing digital policy back to operators using this common language. And God, excuse me. The standardization. Exactly.
You got the keynote.
The standardization is really important because it's that same language whether you're here in Seattle or New York or London or Amsterdam. And it makes it really easy for operators to understand that kind of technology environment wherever they're dropping their devices to operate. And then cities are using, of course, that standard to be able to communicate and manage the systems. So micromobility, kind of first initial use case for MDS. Now it applies to other modes of shared mobility, including taxis, car share, Lyft and Uber services, robo-taxis, so autonomous vehicles, sidewalk delivery robots. And as we continue to support this public-private partnership, we're looking at the application of MDS for aerial mobility, or for the standardization of technology that cities are bringing to intersections, to either manage traffic or address safety concerns. So this principle of a common two-way form of language and information exchange can apply in a lot of different settings. Really quickly, before I turn it over, I want to mention the curb data specification and the partner data spec that we're working with cities to develop. And the CDS is all about the digitization of public space. Now, it's called the curb data specification, but it's more than just the curb. But it's what cities are using to create a digital inventory of their curb rules and regulations. I know from whenever I try to park here in Seattle, it takes me a good few minutes to make sure I can understand exactly what that waterfall of signage is saying, whether at this moment, at this location, on this day, whether I can park here and do I need to pay and how do I do that. So the idea of CDS is digitizing all of those curb rules and regulations in a machine-readable format. So essentially creating an API that all the users of the curb, whether you're a major institution like Amazon or FedEx or UPS or DoorDash or Uber, or mom-and-pop shops, can access that digital curb information via that API. And then cities will understand, based on the data collected from the utilization of the curb, who's using the curb, when, where, for how long. They can then make better informed policy decisions about the allocation of the curb and bring more dynamic management of the curb. The curb is what I like to call some of the most valuable real estate in cities today, but it's some of the least managed real estate in cities today. So the CDS is all about enabling cities to standardize that curb space in a standardized format. So it's consistently whether you're here in Seattle or cities around North America and the world. All right, that's my intro. Kelly.
Oh, me, okay. Kelly Rula, good to be here. I wanted to get a quick round of hands. Who's from academia? Or, academia, I guess I'm in academia now, but I'm not a professor, so, okay, good, awesome. What about private sector? Okay, hi Carl. Public sector. Okay, nice. And then if I didn't put you in a bucket, like community organizations, students, I guess you'd put academia for you. Anyone else? Okay, cool. I wanted to get a sense. That's great. Okay. A lot of public sector. So Kelly Rula here. Like Noel said, I'm now at the Urban Freight Lab, which is here at the University of Washington. We're housed in the Civil and Environmental College of Engineering. And we're a research lab. And what makes us unique is that we work across, I'm going to add on one layer to Andrew's, public, private, and academic. So we bring together private sector players in the urban freight goods movement space, public sector players like Seattle DOT, New York City DOT, Bellevue DOT, and obviously the University of Washington, amazing research institution chops. And we basically all work together to collectively come up with challenges and problems, research projects. We do kind of cross-pollination, learning from private sector what their challenges are, learning from public sector what their challenges are, and then are kind of bringing that research lens to the group. And we host meetings a year. We have a very limited membership, but it's a very unique model, and I was privileged to be able to participate from the Seattle DOT side, and then I moved over to the UW. But what I think we do that's really really innovative and has a technology kind of overlay is that we really work on the cutting edge of the intersection between technology, research, and sort of like practical deployment, practical application. We've done some of the most cutting edge, I mean, I think, I'm obviously biased, but I think we've done some of the leading work on curb, the study of curb, the sort of introduction of technology at the curb, and looking at the commercial use of the curb, so not just passenger movement, which has gotten a lot more of a research focus, and if you look at sort of historical funding, the pie is sort of mostly looking at people movement, and we've done some of the most, I think, cutting-edge work on goods movement there. We like to look at the emerging technologies and really understand, like, where's the opportunity from both a decarbonization perspective, but also like a practical implementation. So we've done quite a lot of work on cargo bike implementation, things like parcel lockers in both residential and sort of like commonly accessible where multiple carriers might access. We've done some really innovative pilots where we bring the private sector in, and so I think what makes us unique again is that we're able to bring private and public together, but then bring that research lens and then publish prolifically. So if you go to our website, you'll see we have a very small and mighty team that is doing a lot of work and getting a lot of really interesting results. Building on one thing that Andrew said around the curb data spec, for example, we did a Department of Energy funded project with Seattle DOT over the last few years. It wrapped up about a year ago, and we did a number of different deployments, technology deployments within that grant package. But one of our interesting findings, which sort of, again, makes the case for why a digital inventory of the curb and why digital tools such as availability at the curb, occupancy at the curb, make sense, is that we were able to study and understand how much commercial vehicles are looking for parking, which had never really been quantified before, and also what happens if you feed them real-time availability of the curb. We were able to reduce cruising for parking by about 30%. So I, of course, forwarded that paper to Andrew and said, hey, we just did research that makes the case for if you're able to evolve this technology to really move towards real time, you can really show carbon, congestion, and sort of efficiency benefits. So that's a snapshot, and then I guess the last thing I'll say is that the Seattle DOT, I led the new mobility team, worked under Andrew in the past as well, and so we worked on things like MDS, all the shared mobility programs, and I did a lot of work with Mel actually on looking at ITS and network system approaches to how do we kind of, again, evolve our data streams, data feeds, and all of the interesting data that the city's already collecting and start to push it out in machine-readable, standardized formats.
Kelly, didn't that study show that about 3 minutes of delay was added, or 3 minutes of circling was added to every delivery on average?
Yeah, it's a lot of time, yes.
3 minutes? Like, extrapolate that across the millions of parcel deliveries that happen every day, like not just in Seattle, but
yeah.
That's a huge amount of time and a huge amount of cost.
Hi, everybody. I'm one of the private sector people. My name's Steve, and in my intro, I noticed a few faces perked up when it mentioned that I had scar tissue. But it's so true. I think it's taken me all this time of gray hair to really work with various kinds of disruptive technology and to see firsthand how technology is cool, but it doesn't get deployed until certain conditions are met. And this is a little bit like in the keynote when we heard that there were three pillars to getting innovation to take root and grow in an area. I think with regard to technology deployment, it needs to be a full solution delivered by partners that cooperate and can support something. Otherwise, it's just a pilot. It's just a test. It's a research thing. And this is not original material. It just so happens that you read books and then you live it, and it becomes very real. So my employer is Monach, a Dutch company that is an absolute world leader in introducing interoperability among ITS stakeholders. And my job started in April, where Monach is now coming to the U.S. market. And so I'm working with agencies as potential customers. But I'm also spending a lot of time with organizations like 5GAA. Anybody familiar with that? It's an industry association that is bringing together the public network operators and the automotive OEMs to get technology moving forward more quickly. Also ITS. in some of the committee work. So that's me. We'll hear more about me as we go, but we're very happy to be part of this conversation. Thank you, Mel, for having us here. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm involved in research in a public transit entity, and in terms of what you all have said, we are often the sort of deployment focused, right? We are often trying out technologies in the course of our work to obviously deliver services that are safe, that make sense for people, and that are equitable, and ideally also adding to the health of our environment through lowered emissions, decarbonization, et cetera. And so some of the ways that I personally engage with the technologies is really kind of on the evaluative side. So how are those technologies helping Metro as a public transit agency to deliver on our promises? And we are often kind of looking at, well, what are the assumptions here about how this technology is supposed to help with that? Certainly, as folks have mentioned, there's lots and lots and lots of data flowing, but we're sort of always looking for the data that help us to answer, those kind of questions like, hey, how is this supposed to work? And then, also asking questions about implementation. So, even in the short time that I've been at Metro, just really, a year and a half-ish, it's been really interesting to see how, sometimes when we are trying to adopt a new technology, there's assumptions about how turnkey it's going to be. It's often not turnkey. And, we're a large public entity. I'll just give you an example. We're actually, our team is involved in an evaluation right now of a technology that would, that is a headway management technology as opposed to a schedule-based management technology. And, there was sort of we joined the evaluation stream a little bit late, and there was a focus, obviously, on, well, hey, how is this technology going to end up reducing bunching and gapping? Well, as we started talking to the team, we realized, my goodness, this implementation is going to require totally different kinds of communication between the transit control centers and base chiefs and operators, completely different. So how prepared are those individuals, are those systems to absorb this technology? What do we need to be mindful of beyond just sort of basic training, but what this is? How is this really going to need to change the communications pattern? So, we ask a lot of those kinds of questions. And then we also, of course, as part of our evaluation, are asking the question about for whom, under what circumstances, and where and when are these technologies actually helping Metro to deliver on those promises of safe, equitable, and sustainable transportation.
Thank you, everyone. I want to open up with a question for you, Andrew. Your experience at Open Mobility Foundation. What are some major obstacles to achieving interoperability, and what solutions are you seeing across the different sectors in the industry?
So I think one of the foundational principles of open source technology is interoperability. And I mean the idea that if you are able to create tools like the mobility data specification, the curve data specification that are open and available for anybody to use, there's no cost, no one has to ask the OMF for permission to use them, and they're developed in a collaborative, public, transparent way. The idea is to be the opposite of kind of the black box theory of technology, and allow systems to actually more fully integrate to better sort of set up the opportunity to achieve the outcomes that we want. Because again, cities aren't adopting technology. Cities aren't using digital infrastructure or on this journey of digital transformation just for the heck of it. They're really driven towards finding new and better ways of achieving their policy objectives, whether that's equity, accessibility, whether it's emissions reductions, safety is a huge one. So the trying to set up this opportunity to create more awareness and understanding of the importance of interoperability and the role that standardization plays in that. I mean, that's a lot of what we spend our time doing in working with this kind of the OMF community, made up of cities and regional governments, and then on the technology side, the operator side as well. So one example that I'll give kind of around this principle of interoperability is what I mentioned around intersections. So as cities are looking to bring more and more technology to the intersection for good reason, because that's where traffic congestion happens, that's where traffic collisions happen, that's where the safety is at its sort of most precarious, especially if you're a vulnerable road user, if you're a pedestrian or a bicyclist. And so cities are intentionally bringing technology to the intersection to better manage that flow of people, of traffic and people, and using really cutting-edge technology to better understand not just like live what's happening in kind of on the street at that moment, but actually use AI for predictions and understanding where the near misses are, so that traffic engineers, can make better informed decisions, whether it's around signal timing or actually channelization, not just based on the crashes that are happening, but also based on the crashes that were about to happen or were very close to happening. And so I use that as an example because right now all the technologies that are being brought to the intersection, there is not sort of a universal interoperability between those. There is not that common language to enable a city to fully realize or harness the data and insights that are coming out of all of that information or that technology that is being deployed at the intersection. There are hardware standards, there are different pieces of standards across the technology, but there's not one that's actually looking at enabling a city to, whether it's a camera or LiDAR sensors or other types of technology that gives a city a full, and I'll use the word like just interoperable picture around what's happening. So that's just one kind of example that I'll throw out there.
So like, when you're dealing with, it sounds like you're often dealing with public agencies, but sometimes I feel like, much like public agencies, industry and companies are siloed.
Yeah.
And so like, how do you deal with company to company or that exchange of data? Because they want to keep it to themselves, and yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a really great point, Mel, and that's what we're up against. And a lot of what we do is kind of informal education, just by helping cities. And I'll pick on Seattle for a second because got the history there. But Seattle was one of the original founding cities of the Open Mobility Foundation back in mid 2019, not that long ago. But they've been using MDS, as Kelly mentioned, for years now. And yet MDS has kind of been kept over in a silo in one area of the department and hasn't fully penetrated across the different sort of groups or areas that are actually responsible for managing different components of the transportation system. So one example of how even within the best intentioned public agencies breaking down those silos and really leveraging the interoperability of this technology is a challenge. On the technology side, I mean, what we're seeing is the nature of technology companies are understandably proprietary. And that is kind of going to be their initial gut approach. But love to see, Steve, what your company is premised on doing, because it's trying to intentionally recognize there's inherent disadvantage to that kind of black box or that proprietary approach. And it's going to take companies like yours and also public agencies to really drive towards the clean demand for that interoperability and kind of just playing nice with each other, so to speak.
It is, in a way, kind of a prisoner's dilemma.
Yeah.
Because you've got stakeholders that run from, say, the people that own infrastructure and the infrastructure itself, which is hoping to be turned into a digital asset. And then you've got roadway managers and people that are doing planning, and then folks in vehicles, work vehicles, personal vehicles, all of which really stand to benefit from these new kinds of technologies and approaches, and yet it takes everybody cooperating for the value to really be unlocked. And I completely agree. You mentioned governance structures, cooperation, as well as technology that enables that. And it's interesting. It's not interesting. It's kind of evident why this came to be also, because when you look at the conversations around cooperative ITS as being a big area to help our societies move forward, it really hasn't had an impact yet. And
It's true.
the conversations around this have been basically architecture conversations without a focus on what the outcomes are going to be. And then you've got, as was mentioned, siloed solutions. You've got agencies, departments solving problems, and they'll procure a solution, and it will be with a proprietary angle to it, so that vendor's trying to box in and protect a slice of commercial opportunity for themselves. And unless we break that cycle, we're really kind of sentenced to having more small pilots and a continuation of siloed sort of solutions. So there's a lot more to say, but I think it does flow from the sort of standards that Andrew's mentioning, as well as some governance structures, which I can comment on a little bit later maybe, but getting the government to participate in bringing people together.
If I can just add on to that, I think this is all great, and again, something that I've observed in the short time I've been at Metro is when we do those kind of small pilot, let's try this, and then we're kind of locked in to an investment, and then there are technological changes, and at some point in the future, that particular thing that we've invested in as a pilot doesn't now interface with other things we need to
Transito ticketing and Orca.
Right.
And then you've got someone's career attached to that decision that they need to protect.
Exactly.
Right?
And so so we obviously we are hugely supportive of standards. I mean that's big, and I think partly we need to be mindful of how do we as a public transit agency benefit from those standards. So like signal prioritization and moving a articulated bus with 100 passengers on it in a prioritized way through a signal. We can certainly benefit as our mission benefits around those standards. And all of that interoperability can really create roadblocks and challenges that are hard to overcome. And especially once we've got people's livelihoods, money, really invested in those things.
Yeah.
So much more to say on this. I feel like we could have a whole panel on just sort of the procurement side, and but I guess my 2-second on this one is just it is as Steve and Andrew said, like, you're fighting against a legacy industry, which is very much, governments issue large contracts, they get locked into legacy enterprise systems. There's very little incentive for, not to name names, but like Siemens to become more interoperable because they own the signal network in most places. And so, again, that's not their fault that it has evolved this way, but it makes it very hard to as Ann was saying, like then you're sort of trying to plug in. And so I think there's a lot of upstream things on the governance side of how we go about procurement, and really this like complete shift in the way we start thinking about how systems and technology and enterprise need to work together. That really does kind of need to drive from the public sector side, in my opinion, because the private sector is still kind of the legacy players, the big players are disincentivized to do that, and then the startups that are trying to do it, it's a struggle for them to break in. How are they going to win $1 billion contract in New York City? They're not going to win it because they're not going to compete with, the internet multinational corporation. So.
Our speaker this morning mentioned ARPA-I, and I don't think she elaborated. Did she elaborate on it? Does everyone know what ARPA-I is? So ARPA-I. So really quickly, not to go down a rabbit hole, but DARPA is this, like, essentially what for the past 50+ years has funded government innovation in the defense for defense-oriented purposes. DARPA is credited with inventing the internet. So they do. It's the ability, the federal government's ability to like throw money at ideas that stimulate really big thinking and lead to I mean, in the internet, it was originally envisioned for defense purposes. Obviously, not all innovation that comes out of from a defense-oriented perspective is necessarily benefiting society, but since then they've replicated that. They have that same model of funding innovation for energy. They have it for what's the other? DARPA health, and now they want to create it for infrastructure. They want to create, that's what ARPA-I is, essentially that type of federal government investment in innovation for infrastructure. Now, the point that I want to make real quick is that the challenge there is we don't even have a national framework for what digital infrastructure is, means, and how we should invest in it. So part of the challenge that we're all facing here as we're living this transformation is we're not getting advice or guidance from our national leaders, from USDOT or from other federal agencies, which in contrast is very different to other parts of the world. And I'll just name Europe real quick, where they, at a supranational level, the European Union level, it's kind of top down in some ways, but they start with really clear sort of strategies or approaches for investment in something like digital infrastructure. So we're left. It's no wonder we're sort of taking this more siloed, stumbling through approach, because we really don't, at a national level, have a coherent strategy for how we should sort of move through this transformation.
Yeah.
So I got a question.
Please.
So it's so striking that the mobility data standard ever happened, right? And I'm looking at Kelly here because. And I think part of what motivated it was the kind of the disaster of TNT sort of running amok and cities not knowing what was going on. And then suddenly this next wave of micromobility comes along and says, hey, we don't want that to happen again. And so there was motivation that says, we're going to play this one differently. We're going to play hardball with these guys, and we're not going to let them operate unless they share their data. And so there was, the public sector did somehow kind of say, we need public infrastructure, we need these private mobility providers, and we're not going to let you do it unless you start until we agree on how we're going to share data so we can both. And so I guess I just wanted you to, is that right? And where are the opportunities for those to try to align incentives again, right? Where it's like, the private actors they're behaving rationally, right? They don't want to share data for rational reasons, but the public sector can get back together as leverage.
Yeah. Again, we can talk for hours. Thank you, Daniel. I think, again, I'm going to make this point, which maybe I'm wrong, which I'm fine being wrong, but I do think that the unique moment was that we were dealing with a player and ecosystem of startups. Like the scooter and bike share were primarily startup industries. I think when I look at, for example, autonomous vehicles, which are funded by Google, which is Waymo, and General Motors, which is Cruise, are two of the largest, I don't see the same are they all coming to your table, Andrew, and saying, please regulate us, please make us share our data? No. And so I do think when you look at a Lime versus, Lime scooters or a lot of these innovative startups, it's a very different game. I don't necessarily know that we figured out how we're going to play hardball with, for example, autonomous vehicle ride hail in the same way that we did with scooters. I think we're already on a different ship. We're already in an unregulated space. They're not sharing their data, which they could have been regulated to do so. So I do think that this matters, like the capitalization of the company matters in a way.
It does. There's a glimmer of hope that is more of that kind of ground up approach, like not the same ability to dictate regulation over an industry, because in that unique situation you had a bunch of very lightweight fleet of privately owned vehicles that if they did not comply, public works departments were more than happy to drive around and pick them all up. And so it was very easy to shut that down if they didn't comply. Much harder, Uber's model was almost impossible to regulate because of the decentralized nature of their model. Now, autonomous vehicles, again, you have a fleet of vehicles. So it's centrally controlled in that way. So it's not fully back to the micromobility days, but there is an opportunity because they are having real operational challenges. Look at San Francisco. Look at Austin. Lately, they know that they actually, without the heavy hand of regulation, they know they need to come together more in partnership, kind of ground up, to find the common ground where working with cities, perhaps on some standardization of digital infrastructure, can actually help their operations. That's what's going to keep them at the table.
If I could further address your question, I love this answer, by the way. I do think that makes total sense.
Yeah.
So I'm voting for you're right. Okay? Everybody that thinks she's right, let's have a show. All right, way to go. The comment was made about Europe, and a lot of experience that I bring to the conversation does come from Europe. And there is a sensibility that a coordinated government is helpful. So there's kind of a knee-jerk, if you'll say, that leans in that direction. And there was something called C-Roads that's coming to a close, but it was a cooperation across Europe to integrate and harmonize data that would be used in cooperative ITS systems. And there were, I don't know the numbers, but let's say there were 15 cities that were demonstrating this in different countries. And that was very cool. Bringing it more toward the Netherlands, though, this was kind of bottom-up, top-down. The authorities across, there's like 6 regions, and there's 300 cities that are big enough to have mayors. They were seeing that they couldn't kind of connect things up, and so they tickled the federal governments, who put together a committee to do this. And the top committee deals with strategy. Where are we going, over what time frame? And then they had a committee below that whose goal it was to get all the various public agencies involved. And then the next key thing was committees that are designed to bring the private sector and public sector together. And they had committees then for setting standards and committees for change control. And this is what it took there. But it was, maybe it's a moment in time because people realize they want the benefits, and I think they keep running their head into a ceiling or a wall or an obstacle of some sort. And so I'd like to think that here in the States it's changing, and I think to support that, you see the federal DOT showing a whole lot of interest. I'm in a whole lot of calls with Federal Highway Administration and US DOT, who are very interested in the kinds of architectures that are being deployed overseas and the kinds of governance that are going into that. So fingers crossed, because I think it's going to take that to bring everybody to a standards-based solution.
So kind of following up on that, like, how do you work through these obstacles? Because oftentimes you have products, you have services, and oftentimes they're often packaged as services to these agencies, and they have to work through that life cycle of the product themselves, unless they have ongoing services, right, agreement or something. But sometimes a lot of these products are tested in kind of a controlled environment, and when you bring it out in the real world, it doesn't work the same. And you have new issues and new challenges to work through, but there's a gap there between the users and the producers of the technology or the managers of the services. How do you work through those obstacles with them when there's a huge gap there? And I know we talked about a lot about policy and stuff, but it's like there's the ground level of like, do they know how to use this? Do they know how to, they have professional training and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, you'll all have many wonderful things to say about this, but again, this is like an experience that is not, it doesn't happen every day, but it's not uncommon for us to see that very thing. So, and just piggybacking on your point, Kelly, I think we've had better success at Metro being able to say to a startup, to more of a startup, this isn't really working. Can you work, can we, kind of look at data, your data, our data, can we figure out where this has kind of gone wrong? And we've also had better luck with a startup to say, we want to try this for 3 months. We're not going to invest, in the massive contract until we are clear that this technology can actually be successfully deployed, usefully deployed, meaningfully deployed in our environment. So we've had better success in that scenario than with a big company who's just kind of wanting us to get the contract essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And you're driven off by, I mean, the public sector is driven by different incentives. They're just trying to provide access and services to the population, whereas a company's trying to make money.
Yeah, I mean, we're sort of in an interesting moment, right? Because we're just on the tail end of a crisis. Right? So for 3 years, we were operating under, all kinds of guidelines. Hey, you have to provide transportation this way. You have to, you can't have more than X people out of, we had to follow many public health and other kind of crisis-oriented guidelines. We're now beyond that, and I think, again, we are huge appreciators of the movement towards more standardization. That benefits public transit users, right? Ultimately, if we can participate in the development, in the testing, in the testing of technologies that are in support of those standards, that's all good. That's all good for public transit. So we're starting to look that way now, towards a future where public transit could be different, could be part of a vibrant regional economy, healthy region. So I think that's our stake, and we're trying to articulate that better.
One example, I'll just build on the transit one, and this is not local, it's actually in New York City, the Transit Tech Lab. I don't know folks that have heard of this, but it's a very cool model, and they operate, I believe it's a nonprofit, but because of the strict procurement rules with public transit agencies and just public sector in general, they actually open up a cohort on a topic and bring in multiple startups and partner with the transit agency, but they actually do the procurement and they do the piloting and evaluation. And the idea is put these technologies head to head, assess multiple technologies at once, and then the winners rise up and can go through, the public sector agency can go through full procurement. I'll also give a shout out to City of Bellevue, basically did this on their own with curb technology a couple years ago, and the Freight Lab was sort of an advisor on that, and they put them head to head and they did an evaluation report. Working in a city, I think cities don't tend to do that because it takes more time, it takes a little bit more money, it's more effort to sort of bring in multiple technologies, but the benefit is you actually get to put them head to head. My last example is SDOT did a procurement in the build-up to a procurement for one of these crowdsourced kind of big data traffic sets, so looking at Iteris, INRIX, et cetera. I won't name names, but they actually used all of the data they already had from their hardware networks and their own manual data counts. They compared to the data they were getting from these providers, and they did their own internal assessment of which one is closest to the data that we've been collecting in different ways for years, and that is how they ultimately made their procurement selection. Nobody takes the time to do that, but it's super important that you can assess technology and you know that you're getting quality product, and that you find providers that are willing to work with you better and not put you through $1 million per change order enterprise system adjustment, which is sort of how these things tend to work.
Totally.
There's a question.
Do you see that as an opportunity for government, state, federal government, in advance of procuring technological resources where there's likely to be conflicts with legacy systems that become sort of a new, I know because in design build you go through a ATP process potentially, but you only pick one of the options. Do you think that in procurement in the future for this type of technological resources that could be something utilized within a procurement in order to do that head-to-head comparison of what type of, how is this going to work with what we already have based off of what we asked for that to happen, and have it be part of procurement so that the folks in your department are on a small scale are running tests against the equipment to ensure interface, all that kind of stuff, so that's information, and then the data, as you mentioned, that gets produced is is this what we need? To keep, because oftentimes existing systems aren't giving you the information that you need either. And so just because you procure a source doesn't mean you're going to get it once, the data that you need once you've had it in place. Do you see that as something that is a possibility for the future?
Yeah, well, we haven't even talked about it yet, but sort of staff capability and capacity and sort of how the transportation space especially is changing so much. And I feel like I've been talking a lot, so I'll let someone else jump in on just the skills for the future leaders of transportation. You need to understand product management. You need to be able to understand that most of the things you're going to be working with and interfacing have a technology component to them. And then this goes back to academia. Are they teaching and training our future urban planners and engineers to think the way and understand technologies in the ways they need to be able to work with these things? You can't manage what you don't understand, which works.
I can speak a little to that because at my time at SDOT, I ended up, and I worked in the operation division, and I worked closely with the signal engineers that did the timing and operations, but also I worked on the operation side of like incident management and technology deployment, with CCTVs and message boards and communication networks. I was kind of in between all that and coordinating all the different teams together to work with Siemens, to work with the vendors, to do pilot tests. But there was no defined role for that. And we're in a union, the process of, promotions and what your role is defined as, I could probably be more in an IT defined role, but that didn't fit, what I was doing. So I kind of ended up stuck in between two different groups, or 3, 4, 5 different groups. So there's no structure there, and it needs to get kind of changed.
Well, and this is a great question, and without getting into the very unsexy details of like government procurement processes.
Oh, go there.
Procurement is governed by an entire set of policies and procedures, very disconnected from the mission, and values even of the government entity, right? And so there's no stake. Those policies and procedures, there's no stake in terms of we need to make sure that this procurement actually gets us here. So that's a problem that I don't have an answer to, but it is part of the ecosystem. But I really appreciate the points about the training and the what is a transportation leader going to need to pay attention to in the future. I think the other, sort of interesting thing, and again, I come as an outsider, so just, have the opportunity to make tons of observations about the public transit space in particular. The, sort of history of it is, I have this one role, I do this one thing, and it hasn't necessarily been a coordinated and collaborative world, and that, is changing, and there's, I think, opportunity for that to change even more.
So I'm frustrated, quite honestly, and because we have a tendency, like the collective, we have a tendency to talk about the importance of innovation, the importance of the use of technology, the importance of using digital infrastructure to help public agencies serve the public good better. But the problem is we don't spend enough time figuring out how to innovate procurement.
Yeah.
And so again, even from a workforce development perspective, like even I just partly this recently there was aha because of the way we're working with the cities and companies that we work with. Like procurement rules were put in place for a reason. They were put in place generally at a time in response to a certain historical context. The fact that those have by and large not changed, and the way that we train our procurement officers really hasn't changed. To have more of an outcome-based focus, to actually enable them to think about a procurement in a much more flexible or creative way. So that, as Kelly and I were joking the other day, it's like sometimes we may have been accused back in the SDOT days of breaking the rules. But we weren't breaking the rules. There were no actual rules that were being broken. We were just taking a more flexible approach, interpreting the rules that were out there.
With the lawyers, but
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I love lawyers.
And actually having lawyers, it's an interesting day when you have the lawyers who are
Yeah.
more at your side
Yeah.
than the procurement officers.
Yes.
And so, and that's just an example, and I don't mean to pick on procurement officers at all, but I think it gave me an aha moment of when we think about workforce development, it needs to go
Yeah.
sort of across the spectrum and come up and down the spectrum of what is necessary to actually implement this technology transformation.
Well, and your great point about leaders needing to appreciate technology will be part of this, and being able to have the capacity to, understand, ask good questions, know what data are telling them, all of those capacities around interpretation and those sorts of things are key. Yep.
There's a question?
Yeah, we had in the back.
So I understand the frustration more than you possibly know. I work with tribal government. So you have federal, state, county, BIA, you name it. We have all the alphabet soup telling us you can do this, but you can't do this on this road because that's a county road. And then you have the highways. Curbs, we don't have curbs. I'd love to have curbs. We're not even there yet. Some of our roads, people think I joke, but there are still 3 roads on my home reservation that were actually part of a wagon trail. And nobody is owning it. And so, because there's issues with it. So you're talking about procurement, you're talking about technology and policies, and I'm loving this because we're not even at the policy. We don't even. One of the things I hear with the 46 tribes I work with is, well, yeah, we'd like to have technology, but we don't know what's out there. And does it work in rural America? Because there's lots of places that where on reservations you have no cell phone service, no Wi-Fi. If there was dial-up still available, that would be the only thing that would possibly work because of landlines. But my big question to all of you, and especially ITS Washington, is we need to work together to let tribes know what is available and what works in their areas when you're still looking at roads that are, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s standards, let alone not even. One tribe said, what the blank is complete streets.
I'm curious real quick, just a question back to you. Did any of those 46 tribes that you work with apply for a US DOT SMART grant?
Yes.
Okay.
And we're not selected.
Oh, so first round you didn't get any, how about this round that just closed?
I know that,
Weren't selected.
I think 2 tribes applied for it this year that I work with.
Okay.
I don't know about the other tribes in the other regions.
Okay.
There's another question here?
Yes, this could be like once the technology is identified to public to practically implemented, and compared to last 20 years and the current days. The past 20 years back, how much time is taking to implement the technology to available public, and how much time is taking now in the current stages? You got my question?
Well, I'm going to play it back. I think you're go ahead, please.
No, I was going to say, I want to keep the conversation, I guess, those type of questions at the end,
Okay.
and just keep it on the topic for now.
A little time check as well. So what do you want to do, Mr. Moderator? That
No,
clock is worthless.
Yeah.
And right now, we have
So,
5 minutes, I
okay.
think.
Yeah, just kind of go on kind of working through how to deal with challenges and whatnot, right? I was going to go to you, Steve, because you've done some deployment, and as an engineer, there's a classic way of, the deliverable of a project, but you're working with technology specifically, and kind of the iterative approach of deployment and testing and all that. So.
And maybe I could get some of your question answered in the process, and how to put 5 pounds of stuff in a 1 pound box because of time. I think I'd like to describe a project. This is in the Netherlands, so let's just benchmark this. The Netherlands is a little bigger than LA County. It has about the same number of road miles. It has about the same number of signalized intersections. And we observed that stakeholders to be involved in a system like this needed the ability to both consume and to publish information. And this gets back to our mention of siloed systems, because typically that's a one-way direction flow to solve a problem. And instead, we set up an environment where everyone could share information. And this started with the government, yes. They wanted to make all of the traffic signals smart in the Netherlands, which is to say they wanted each of the traffic signals to their status to be known and utilized by vehicles on the road. And so starting in 2016 and finishing in 2020, the system is now growing in a different direction. And I want to explain that, but we have currently about 40% of all the traffic signals connected in the Netherlands, feeding various information service providers and delivering results and information into about 25% of the vehicles on the road. And it was done through standards. So I mentioned the government set up some committees. The committees drove standards. And to your question on time, all this took about 4 years. They drove standards. The standards were embraced. The standards were created by the community of traffic signal controller technology companies, so it would be Siemens in our local parlance. There were some large U.S. suppliers involved in this, and at this point, everyone that makes and sells traffic signals in the Netherlands has to include this data exchange standard, and they're not considered if they don't support the standard, and there's nothing in the system that I've described that can be proprietary. Nothing. No interfaces. So it forced the community to get together. Today, there's over 1.5 billion messages exchanged every day on this system. So what rolled out, and this is the beauty, I guess, just to cram a message into a small container here, this is the beauty of standardization, because instead of just getting transit signal prioritization, and I have to list it because there's a number of these things. So it began with traffic light controller status, and it began with prioritization for emergency vehicles and traffic flow optimization. Those were the use cases that drove the first 4 years of this activity. Since then, emergency vehicle preemption, in-vehicle speed limit displays, safety messaging. If you're in a vehicle with an app running on your phone and you hear a siren, it will announce to you that the emergency vehicle is approaching from behind you. It's tied into cyclist awareness. Of course, cyclists are everywhere in the Netherlands, but there's AI being applied to the bike pathways, such that if there's a preponderance of bikers, especially during school children hours, it will change the traffic signals automatically and alert drivers to the presence of vulnerable road users. It controls access to city center, so if there's a congestion relief necessary. The point being is, once there's standardization, then the floodgate opens, because each of these things I just mentioned were services provided by some vendor in contract to the agency, but the vendor didn't have the agency painted into the corner. So the agency can then have more than one prioritization vendor, and so on and so on. I see a question, and I know we're out of time, so I'll defer to you guys.
I don't think it's so much a question. Can I really quickly? Because I feel like we just glazed over this really important question about access to technology that didn't get very much consideration. Like 1 in 5 communities in Washington State is rural. We're making a lot of assumptions that we have access to this technology. And so it's great to think about the standardization, but in this conversation, it doesn't seem like there's been really any thought so far about centering equity and access to these technology systems, and I just wanted to make sure that we touched on that before we left.
100%. And that was something I wanted Andy to touch on, and then experience at King County Metro. It's like the technology that, for me, I kind of anti-technology sometimes, because I feel like that just kind of gappens the gap between those that have it and those that don't. So, can you speak on your experience on what King County is doing on that front?
Well, not really. I mean, I can't speak to what King County is doing, but I can say that, again, I think this is such a huge question, and it's one that we need to have discipline around asking is, where and for whom are these technologies accessible? And are they, do they have potential to really address the biggest, most real-time issues and problems? And I think we, to Claire's point, we are seeing there's a lot of diversity in the communities, even in our state, even in our county. In our county, we have urban cores, we have suburban areas, and we have near rural, communities. And access and equitable access is a huge concern. And I think that sometimes there's a tendency to focus on how is this technology working, perhaps over and above the questions of access. So what I would say is the importance of the discipline around that in both the research, and in the then kind of testing.
And one thing, big question is what does success even look like, for each technology? How do you define that? I think the challenge is a lot of times the public agencies are pushed to show every project they did was a success, right? The metrics that they use is we improved this, we improved that, but my thing is it's okay to fail, it's okay to have a bad pilot project or whatnot, and to show that, because then that kind of offers them to grow and learn from that.
So last point I wanted to make, kind of in response to your question, actually, why I asked the question about the SMART grants, is because I credit USDOT for actually creating a new program that allocated 40% of the funding for small, rural, tribal communities. Problem and the massive gap that we've now seen over the first round and now going into just completing the applications for the second round is they didn't provide any of the scaffolding to actually make this grant funding and the projects more accessible to those communities that don't have the capacity. So they went into this thinking we're going to create this really innovative, generally small amounts of money, quick prototype projects that creates an opportunity to test and potentially fail. But we're going to create a new grant formula that will have accessibility for small, rural, tribal communities. But they didn't resource the capacity building for that. And we're working with some of the largest, most capable cities, and they don't have the capacity to apply and succeed in many cases with federal funding projects like this, let alone those that are starting at a much lower level. So we've got to convince the feds that, right, you took a good first step. Now you also need to make sure in your grant programs that you actually fund the breadcrumb efforts to make sure that the communities can actually take advantage of the new funding opportunities. Not an answer, but
just to wrap up, we're kind of limited. There's one point, down the line that people can walk away from. We have students, researchers, academics, and private sector.
Well, real quick, I'd say we are right now today living this digital transformation. So we're kind of building the airplane as we fly it, again, the collective societal we. There's a lot of gaps that are being identified along the way. That, to me, presents an opportunity to then identify and help fill those gaps.
Let's see. Go into public sector. It's great. This is for the students. We need smart future leaders that understand technology and other issues like equity, safety, climate, that can come in and bring their next generation, Gen Z, if you will, energy to solving these problems. And then the second point would be, we talked a lot about procurement, for example, and I think it's some of this unsexy stuff is actually the most important, and we need more people to focus on the less of the shiny object, but the enabling structures and governance and policies that are so easy to forget about. And honestly, you feel very rewarding when you fix one of these systemic issues, which I think we've all maybe had the opportunity to do so. But just unsexy is cool. That was
Put interoperability into every project going forward, no matter how small, and SMART grants for sure do that.
Yes, I will just plus one on what Kelly said around the unsexy systemic stuff that often stands between a technology deployment and a positive result. procurement being one of those things or more. And then the other thing, just to echo something that I said earlier, is to kind of follow the thread all the way through. So, ensure that implementation is not only, possible, but there are opportunities to learn and improve implementation along the way, and to pay attention to the end, particularly around access and equity.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. Thank you, everybody.
Good job.
Yeah, that was great.